Thank you, Reed. Really appreciate this. Let me go ahead and get this up. Yeah, so just before I start, thank you so much, Reed, for coordinating this. This is such an honor to be invited to speak for the Georgetown Institute of Politics, even though I'm a GW grad, so I feel like I'm behind enemy lines tonight. I am actually in Spain right now visiting family, and my niece recently turned 5, so that's why there are 50 million balloons behind me. So just bear with me there. This is my first time doing anything like this, so I'm hoping this can be a really productive hour for us both. So let's get started. So basically at the top, Reed mentioned that obviously this is a career chat, so I'm going to talk about how I got to where I am, demystify that process a little bit. And then after that, just going to talk about what goes into a hit, what you should be thinking of every time you're pitching to a reporter to make sure that you're getting as much mileage as possible out of your hits. Then after that, I'm going to talk about the Team Pete experience, which has still been unlike anything I've ever done, really fulfilling year of my life. And just talk about some of the ways that I think we were a cut above the rest as far as our comms team goes, and just walk through some examples to demonstrate that. And then after that, just walking through what I wish I knew if I had the opportunity to sit down for a chat like this before starting that whirlwind here and having to really struggle to keep up with my colleagues that are way more impressive. So yeah, let's get started. So when I was thinking about how to really spell out my my career, it made less sense to talk about it chronologically and more thematically. So I'm going to walk through really just me starting out as your basic one-lane researcher, and then kind of talking about how I started weaving in communication skills into that work when I was on the track. So starting out, I graduated from GW in 2015. Like many of you, I'm sure that you've really taken the opportunity during your time in college to really do as much as you can to experience that entire political field. I grew up in a small town in Georgia, so I didn't know that like pursuing a career in politics was a thing people did. But that being said, I also got like a 147 on my practice LSAT. So it was this or nothing. So in doing that, I kind of made sure I did a ton of different internships while I was at GW. I was a finance intern. That was a dark time for me. I was a communications intern. I also did field, knocked doors, basically did everything. Ironically enough, the one thing I didn't do because I didn't know it existed was research. So my first job actually out of college was as a research assistant at an opposition firm. From there, I really learned just the basics of what a researcher does, how to write a bullet, what you should be looking for when you're looking through a bunch of newspaper articles, how to present that and lay it out for a client. Once that internship ended, I went to Spears Consulting, which was based in DC. And as a straight research firm, there were really only two things flying out of the doors there. It was just self books and oppo books. From a research perspective, what you're doing is exactly the same. Self books, kind of explanatory. It's just, a candidate will say, find all my vulnerabilities. Let me see what my positives are as well. So maybe that I can, build some ads on top of that, build a messaging strategy around it. And then obviously for oppo, if you have an opponent that you want to dig up dirt on, that's basically what it is. So what a researcher does, they build these really long documents called books. They are hundreds of pages long, and you find everything that you can publicly find about a person. So that's just doing basic stuff like going through Facebook, their Twitter, any news clips they might have had, any appearances they might have had on TV. To the more deep dive stuff like pulling their property records to make sure that they're not homesteading in more than one property, pulling their tax records. If they own a company, make sure that they're not go through their campaign finance to make sure they're not like contracting out their own company, essentially paying themselves, going through their voting history. If they are an elected official, going through their legislative history, just anything that you can find. So they're very time consuming. They take a lot of time. Over my year at Spiros, I only worked on 3 books, like just to give a sense of how in-depth that work is. But it's still to date the most thorough work that I've ever, just pure research work I've done, because everything else has been pretty much just producing a lot of quick documents. So after Spiros, worked on a couple campaigns, which I'll get into in a little bit, and then I was at Emily's List. So Emily's List I started in 2017. I started a couple months after Trump was inaugurated, which was a good and a bad problem for us because literally tens of thousands of women reached out to Emily's List, since it's really the only pro-choice Democratic org that's not only just throwing money at candidates, but also providing infrastructural support to them as well in their campaigns. So we had all those people, but up until that point, Emily's List had really only focused on federal candidates or just really big statewide candidates. So we didn't really have the infrastructure to bring those women in and support them in any sort of way, in any sort of real way, not to really support all the numbers that were coming in. And so what our president, Stephanie Shriak, really started that year was an initiative to make sure that we were bringing those women in and striking while the iron was hot, rather than letting those women go somewhere else or not run at all. So in doing that, I ran our vetting operation for state and local endorsements, which was kind of a multi-department operation that did a lot of coordinating with our campaigns team, our communications team, and our digital team. And vetted over that time over 700 women for the 2017 and 2018 cycle. Obviously that's a lot of women, and I just said I did 3 books in a year at Spiros, so we were not writing full books for these women. We were doing something that's called a choice vet, which was probably no longer than 20 pages for women, going through anything we could find publicly on their stances on abortion rights, women's issues, LGBTQ issues, labor, and gun violence prevention. So just to make sure that, if we endorsed someone, it wouldn't then come out that they were like, anti-choice. So in doing that, we ended up endorsing about 598 of those women from the 700, which was just a really exciting moment for me as a researcher, because not only did I run a really thorough program, but I also helped Emily's List build out its bench of diversity for the candidates. And now it's exciting to see a couple years later, some of those women that ran for the first time in 2017 or 2018 and won, now running for higher office. So for example, Jennifer Carroll Foy in Virginia, I think I did her vet in 2017 when she was running for Virginia House of Delegates. And so now she's running for governor of Virginia. So it's really exciting to get to watch those women, on their journeys. So moving on to the stuff I did on the trail for both the U.S. Senate in Georgia for Jim Barksdale and for John Wisniewski in New Jersey. And that was 2016 for Georgia and 2017 for New Jersey. I was the research director for both of those races. The basic research stuff that I was doing was pretty much the same, building, not writing a book for these candidates, but building on the books that already existed, coordinating with research consultants on that, writing really quick backgrounders for the candidates if they needed to be prepped for something, if they were meeting with Planned Parenthood or a veterans group, making sure they were kind of walking into that meeting knowing everything that was probably going to be covered. And then also just filling out questionnaires for interest group endorsements, that kind of thing. Veering more into the comms side of stuff, I ran debate prep for both of these races. So really, that was just, that's the first time I started really thinking of my research in an external way, thinking of how to really not just know the facts, but also how to message around them. So in doing that, really started working with them with that. And then since that was pretty successful for the Georgia race, and it's more relevant to note that since that was my first time doing it, I was then kind of brought in for more day-to-day comms work. So talking about prepping the candidate on news of the day, prepping them for interviews with reporters, and just any media appearances that they had. So that was pretty much the experience for both races. And then after that, I did Emily's List after those races. I felt like I basically had every other level of government experience as far as campaigns go, but I'd never done a presidential before. So I was like, it's 2019, this is the year it's happening. And that was kind of around the time everyone started talking about Pete. And so, I didn't know who he was yet. I threw my resume in to, the basic jobs for a bunch of different campaigns. And then Liz Smith was in my inbox and I was like, oh, okay. So in doing that, I started, I think, April 2019, a week before Pete launched in South Bend. So it was really exciting to be there for that experience. I was brought in as a researcher. I was one of the first hires on the campaign. So my focus was really on what Pete was doing, what Pete's mayoral record was, that there was a lot of uncovered research with that. So a lot of my job was kind of backfilling that in to make sure that we understood exactly what initiatives he did in office and how to talk about them. And I'll get into that more when we talk about the Team Pete experience. Now I'm just going to talk about, how a hit comes together. And I think it's really beneficial that I kind of came through this from a research standpoint, because I've now been able to see kind of every level of how comms works. And so that part I'm just going to go ahead and get into. So the things that are really important about pitching to a reporter is making sure that you're not just approaching them with the end goal in mind. Obviously, you want them to write something that's either good for you or damaging for your opponent, but you need to walk them through the whole journey there. Reporters need to be spoon-fed information. You can't just expect them to just put the pieces together for you. So you want to come to them with everything that you want them to understand. So the first thing, talk to your researchers. This is something that we got in, we really started on the ground floor with Pete, with a really good open line of communication between comms and research. It doesn't always happen. That is the bitter researcher speaking that usually doesn't know something's going out until you're reading about it. And then it's this is not actually what the story is. That's not, you completely miss the nuance. So you want to make sure that you talk to your reporters, tip them regularly, because they're going to be able to tell you what the hard objective facts are. And then also focus on who said what. So that second part is really important. Your media monitor operation needs to be top notch. Your comms operation is only as strong as your weakest media monitor. If you are missing stuff that your candidate is saying, that your opponents are saying, it's not going to look good when you put something out and then you've got the other team saying, well, that's not right, here's the clip. So you want to make sure that your research is tight before you even start building a hit. After that, you want to think about the context. So why does it matter right now? And how much does it matter? Who said what to who, and what venue were they at? Is it bad or is it worse because they were to one venue versus another? You want to understand that stuff going in. And then after that, that's when you get to the fun part where you put the spin on it and then get the money quote in Politico or Washington Post or wherever you're pushing this stuff. But on top of that, you don't want to just needle an opponent either. The best hits are the ones that build. So you want to be able to, if you had something else, if you want to build a narrative, you're going to want to make sure things repeatedly line up so that people start to notice a pattern in whatever you're trying to build, because that's what a narrative actually is. It's a pattern that you want people to identify. And then what's the takeaway? Who are we pitching this for? Are you doing something for your political team so they can get an endorsement? Are you doing something so that you can improve your polling numbers with women? What is the point? Make sure you understand what that is. And then that also determines who you're pitching this to as well. So we're going to get more into that too. But that's basically the anatomy of a hit, why it matters so much, and what you should be thinking about every single time you pitch to a report. About the best team on the best team on the best team in politics, rapid response, what you came here for. The rapid response team on Pete. Ooh, I will walk through fire for those guys. I'll talk more about them in a little bit. But being able to learn from them is something that I know will continue to pay dividends for the rest of my professional career. I wish there was more. I wish I could talk to you about every single day on the campaign, because it was just that fulfilling for me. So this is the mantra here. This is the main foundation of what went into just the comms work in general on Pete. Liz's philosophy that you go everywhere, you turn nothing away, and you do as much as possible to reach people where they are. If someone doesn't understand your message, if someone's not getting your message, it's because you didn't do the work to get to them. it doesn't matter, like, it just doesn't matter what the outlet is. You should be thinking of that every single time. If you're constantly and only pitching things to MSNBC and Washington Post, you're not doing it right. So in this case, this asterisk by platform, Liz is talking about TMZ, a outlet that holds a very special place in her heart. But we went everywhere. We went on the Breakfast Club. We went on really obscure, like people's podcasts. We did everything. And, you don't always get the same play every time, but it matters if you have one person that talks to their community about this Pete guy that they saw in the one niche outlet that they enjoy. So you want to always think about doing that stuff. There's nothing too small. You shouldn't be going into this with an aspect of what prestige is. You should really be thinking about talking to voters, because at the end of the day, that's the point. And in doing that, it puts a target on your back sometimes, because we spoke to everyone. We increased Pete's name ID. We were polling well. Pete was doing well in debates. We were pitching that well. We were spinning all those things. So it puts a lot on your back, makes people nervous, because cutesy gay mayor from the 4th largest city in Indiana should not be doing this well in a presidential primary. So in doing that, we got a lot of incoming sometimes. This month was particularly horrible. It is November 2019. Even when I was doing the research to put this together, I had to take a second and breathe, because it brought back a lot of memories. But that is the experience that being on the rapid response team was, and I am better for it. I'm not gonna read all this to you guys, but this is basically what happened. And one of the things that made us able to track these things and aided our rapid response was working with our digital team, who was tracking Twitter even more than we were, to kind of identify little bubbles of things before they exploded, so that we could actually talk to reporters ahead of time, say, look, something's coming in, here's what you need to know, here's the actual context, here's why it's a bad faith attack, or whatever. So if you can bring those things that are going to be hits, even to a little bit of a draw, that's a win. Sometimes that's the best you're going to do, but you should always try to do pushback on things. This is part 2 of that. It was just hit after hit after hit. Mid-November to mid-December was a rough time for us. But shout out to Stephen Smith, who was on our content team, who tracked all of this for us. Okay, and this is my team, my family, the rapid response team. That's Sean Sabet, who's directly behind me. He was our rapid response director. Right behind him in the vest is Matt Cordoni, the deputy, and then in the back is Manuel Bonder, and he was our media monitor extraordinaire. Completely bailed us out at many an occasion, just because he had everything Pete ever said. So that was really helpful for us. So going into this case study, November 11th, 2019, I'll never forget. LA Times, November 11th was cleanup day. November 10th is when shit got real. Pete had a rally where he said failures of the old normal is what led to the Trump administration. For some reason, someone at the LA Times heard that as failures of the Obama era, and everything blew up overnight, the night of November 10th. By the time we got up in the morning, I think I checked my phone at 6 a.m., Manuel was already on it. He's like, that's not what happened. Here's the quote, here's the clip. And then we just started blasting that to reporters, so that everything was pretty much cleaned up by 8 a.m. If we didn't have that clip, and if we didn't have that, if Manuel was not on his job every single day and stuff like that flew through the cracks, that would have been at least a week of pain for us. Because it went viral, the incorrect quote went viral. And then, Pete was already kind of the main character on Twitter, just because of Pete had that effect on people. I'm still trying to figure out what it was. This just kind of just threw kerosene on that fire. And if we didn't have the tools to push back on that immediately, got the reporter to also recant, it would have just been a really bad day for us. So shout out to Manuel specifically for saving the day there. And then Iowa, which is the longest week of my life. One of the things that made us so effective in Iowa was the relationship that we've been building with reporters up into that point. And also our fantastic data and analytics team that we were running our own boiler room like miles ahead of Iowa's actual boiler room. So we were able to give reporters the actual on the ground count because we had people at every single precinct in Iowa, every gym, every parking lot. We were there. We could tell you who was voting when, what happened. And because of that thorough work, shout out to our Iowa team, we were the only ones with numbers that night. So we did what we were supposed to do. We flagged the numbers. And that kind of helped us build the narrative, of course, that we won because we knew we did. We had the numbers. No other campaign could do that. There was a lot of salt because they just didn't do the work to make sure that they had that kind of reporting pipeline to make that happen. This is life advice I'm about to give you. It applies to comms, but it really just, it's applicable for everything. It's kind of evergreen advice. This is what you need to know. This is the stuff. If someone sat me down and said, bro, you're about to join this campaign, you need to know these 3 things. This is what I would have wanted to know. Number 1, Twitter is tiny. I know I spent a lot of time talking about Twitter, but Twitter is very small. Roughly 20% of Americans have an account. Of that 20%, those 10% of those people are writing 80% of the content. So at the end of the day, what you're seeing on Twitter is the anger, fear, joy, and frustration of 6 million Americans. They would like to think they speak for all of America, but they don't. So what you need to understand is Twitter is important. You should definitely track it from a comms perspective. It did help us. It did serve as, I guess, a smoke detector for what was about to blow up for us in a real way when like reporters and publications actually started running some of the hits against us. But do not overreact to everything you see on Twitter. That is me. That's more advice to me. I still feel like, you want to immediately jump on something and immediately push back against every negative thing you see on Twitter. It's just, it's so not in line with what America actually pays attention to and looks at. I mean, you can just look at the dichotomy between, Pete's reputation on Twitter and how we did in the primary and the fact that he is the only primary candidate that is, Secretary of Transportation. So I think we did something right. In the cabinet, he's the only person in the cabinet. So keeping that in mind is going to be really important for anyone doing comms work. 2, no one knows what they're doing. And not to say that people are incompetent, but just that don't feel like you are the dumbest person in every room you step into. And I'm just kind of specifically talking to women and POC here because I suffer with imposter syndrome too. It's important to understand that it's okay to ask questions. No one's going to think you're dumb, and it's better to just take the time to learn rather than do something wrong and then get corrected. So that's really important. Just keep that in mind. And then last one, huge, being decent goes so much farther than you think. There were so many things that we were able to massage down into worse hits for us just by being nice to reporters. And it sounds very obvious, but I think if some of you have been watching the news over the past month or so, it's not something everybody does. And so you need to just be nice to reporters. They'll be nice to you too. And just be decent humans. This is really, I understand why we all get into politics because we feel these things. This is just, it's not just work for us. It's a passion. You're building the world you want to see. But be decent because it pays dividends every time. So that's it. You guys can follow me at Roderica, but I'm really excited to answer you guys' questions. Please come around.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that really great overview. I know that I learned a lot from that, and it's fun to hear some of your behind the scenes stories. So we're going to go to student questions now. I know we had somebody who sent a question that couldn't be here tonight, so we'll start with that question, and then maybe that'll prime the pump. So can you talk to us a little bit about what it means to get involved in the field in the first place? So how do you get your start? How do you build up some of the background to even go into this field?
Yeah. So I guess it's a question about building a network. I'm not the best at small talk, so I was really not the person that did the informational coffees and stuff. I mean, I'll do them for people, but I was really not the person to reach out. But those are really helpful. Actually, DC is kind of a town where when people say like, "Oh, let's get coffee," they really mean it. You should reach out to those people. People want to help you. I know, DC gets the reputation for being a very cutthroat town, but people actually generally want to help. Everyone, and especially once I've been doing this for like 5-6 years. I'm at the stage now where I see who I was 5 years ago in the people that reach out to me for stuff. So I always want to help. I'm also available too. My DMs are open if anyone has questions. But yeah, I think you should just talk to everyone possible, but also just like doing good work on the campaigns that you get to work on really also speaks for itself. So do that too.
All right, thank you. So we're gonna go first to Ingrid.
Okay.
Hi. Okay, so one of the things that I really like about Mayor Pete is like when I first came out to my parents as queer, like one of the very first things they said was like, "Oh my God, this is gonna ruin your career. Like if you ever try to do anything in politics, like this is gonna make it so much harder to have like job security and anything like that." And I was wondering, like having worked on Pete's campaign and like being a woman of color, like what would you say has been your experience with, how being a woman or how just like having those like different factors have affected you in your career? Sorry,
Yeah. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Actually, the other day I was interviewed by a Black woman for the first time. Like that's kind of the barriers we're still breaking here. It is kind of weird. I mean, even, when you say think fast, think of 5 Black women that are in comms and crushing it right now. It's a struggle, it's hard. It's still very much a boys' club. There's still a lot of work that has to be done. But I'm really proud that I've, had the opportunity to work in really inclusive spaces that never really made me feel like I couldn't speak up. I'm also very loud and I'm used to saying no because I came from the research world, which that was really the only word I said most of the time. So it's been a really rewarding experience. I'll say that, since really entering the working world in 2015, I've seen way more diverse faces, even since then. So I really like the trajectory that, Democratic political staff spaces are going in. But yeah, there's always more that can be done. But yeah, I mean, I think it's been a pretty rewarding experience.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Right, excellent. We'll go to Emily Fisher next.
Thank you so much for joining with us. And I remember seeing all the comms work throughout. I was wondering, one big advantage that, of course, that Pete had in Iowa is gaining some of the Iowa newspaper endorsements and such, and kind of branching out. And he was known for interacting with reporters, even going around the Iowa State Fair for food. So I was kind of wondering, how do you target comms specifically for going to newspapers, very local print, and media, and try to balance how you respond and engage with the print, the local TV, and then when you have a lot of interest in from certain national sectors that may come in?
Yeah. So I mean, those decisions were made over my head, but also we had comms teams in all of the early states that they were the ones really building the relationships with the reporters. So it was them that were deciding, no, we have to talk to DMR today, or we've got to, talk to these other publications, or we haven't spoken to this reporter in a while and we haven't spoken to them since the Iowa State Fair. That being said, the bus that we did really helped with all of that, because you're just throwing like 30 reporters for every leg going, from stop to stop. So that made it a lot easier to hit all those folks. But yeah, I mean, I think every day you have to make that balance. It's a balance based on just who hasn't been hit in a while and what play you're going to get out of each place that you use Pete for. But also, I mean, our comms team, we would be on the phones, the comms team would be on the phones all day talking to reporters. So if you didn't get time with Pete, you were going to get time on background with at least one of us. So we were in constant contact with basically everyone that reached out. I don't think we had a whole lot of like requests for information that got dropped. So most of the time, if you weren't hearing from Pete specifically, you were hearing from us. But I mean, between our media monitor team and just the tracking that I was doing from things that Pete said before the campaign started, we pretty much had a quote for any question that came in.
Great. Well, and if you have questions, feel free to raise your hands and we'll call on you or unmute you. But will you tell us how you made decisions about what was worth responding to? And if you responded to something that didn't deserve it, would it accidentally blow it up? Like, how do you walk that tight line?
Yeah, didn't walk it very well a lot of the time. I think starting out, I was very, like I said, very reactive, like, oh my God, we've got to respond to everything or the world is going to end. But then you just get a sense. We kind of looked at, well, how many followers does this person have? Are they, for Twitter specifically, because that was kind of my domain, how many followers do they have? Is it really worth it? Is this going to get any play? Is it better to just reach out to them in DMs, or should we, contact our traveling press secretary who had a relationship with a lot of these people with bigger accounts? Just what makes the most sense. Definitely didn't always do it right. But I think especially around debates, I did a lot of just rapid response tweeting for that. So just fact checking the debate. I think those were the most useful things. We had a digital army on Pete that then used those tweets to spread into their own network. So it wasn't really just like me being the only voice out there, which made it a lot easier. So even if it wasn't something that it made sense for a staffer to respond to, because you didn't want them to know how deep in your mentions you were, you would have then someone like a supporter of the campaign push that information. So that was a bit of a shadow operation I did as well.
So in the research side of your role, how often were you creating, a lot of our students, when they first enter, they're going to be in roles where they're responding to inflow, but how do you handle that balance of self-initiated research and being kind of like a go-getter versus responding to work that your bosses are requesting from you? How do you suggest students navigate that?
Well, there's no structure on campaigns, so you kind of have to do whatever feels right at the moment. Since research was still part of my job, there were long-term documents that I was putting together, and then just responding to incoming that was coming in. Sometimes, if I felt like we were getting needled by a particular campaign, and I was mad about it, I would then put together some sort of offense stuff that ended up being really useful for debates. So I think when I was, thinking of ways to needle candidates, that was really where I put that energy in those docs. That ended up really ended up getting the most play, because stuff like that coming from a staffer doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So that's kind of when we used Pete's megaphone for those things. But it's basically just a balance of what makes sense. Our rapid response team was very collaborative. We would normally, there's a joke, one of us on the team would text us at 3 a.m. with just random thoughts that he was having, then we'd talk about it after getting coffee in the morning. That was just kind of how we worked. We definitely just had one big brain by the end of it. It was kind of creepy. We were finishing each other's sentences. But when you just are in that collaborative environment, we also just sat around each other in a horseshoe, just shouting ideas back and forth with each other. If it was something that felt like it made sense to dig more into, then that's what I would do. But yeah, every day's different. Just analyzing what makes the most sense to spend your time on is just a time management skill that you'll develop as you work on more campaigns.
During your out-of-town trip, how did you know who to approach? Who is more of a senior reporter to get your message in the front line?
Yeah, I didn't travel, so that would be really up to the traveling press team. We had Chris Marr, who's our national press secretary, and then Nina Smith, who was our traveling press secretary. If it was something really big, both of them would go out and just run Pete's gaggles and that kind of thing. But typically, mentioning gaggles, that's really, you would just talk to a bunch of reporters at once. We didn't really do a lot of exclusives. It just really it didn't fit Pete's brand, didn't fit our messaging strategy. You can't go everywhere if you're only giving a specific slot to someone every day. It's just not effective or efficient. So that's really how that went for us.
Great. All right, we have a question from Charlotte.
Hey, Ro, how you doing? I'm a big fan of your work. Huge fan.
Oh my God, what are you doing here?
I wanted to ask, have you thought of running for office?
No, I'm not running for office. People ask me that a lot, which sounds like a very conceited thing to say, but it's True, I get asked a lot, especially because I'm from Georgia, which is apparently blue now. But no, it's a lot more fun to do the work behind the scenes. So I look forward to supporting incredible Democrats up and down the ballot for the rest of my career.
All
Well,
right.
thank you for all you do.
Thanks, Charlotte.
Yes, I echo that sentiment. Okay, so Dan asks if you could get on a table to yell about one thing you learned from the campaign that others should know, what would it be?
One thing I've learned from the campaign that others should know. Ooh, that's a tough one. I think it's honestly, if you're gonna have, if you need to be consistent in what your message is and make sure it always makes sense. And to say that, just to talk about, one of the opponents on the trail, if one of your things is talking about making everything add up and talking about your policies, you need to make sure you're actually thinking about making it all add up and making your policies make sense. I would say those are one of the main things that is effective, because at the end of the day, if that's your message frame, then you can't get flustered when people start asking questions about it. So I think that would be the one thing. Make sure your platform makes sense.
That's helpful. So what if you're working for like a city council candidate or a state house candidate who might not have a lot of press attention or like a large social following? How do you adapt? And this, our students might be in roles that aren't specifically related to research or rapid response because they have to be more general at that level. Like, what is some advice for getting your candidate attention or putting out content around live events that you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I would say number one thing is make sure that your candidate is the type that can handle that. Not every campaign needs a go everywhere strategy. It worked so well for Pete because you could throw Pete on with no prep and he'd figure it out. My candidate in Georgia was not that type of candidate. He was a first-time candidate. He'd never really been in the political space before. There was a lot of work with me and him. That was just, honestly, it was media prep, but honestly, it was just personal story prep. There was so much that it was kind of like trying to bleed a stone with him, just because he didn't understand what actually was significant from a political standpoint. So I remember quite literally yelling at him the day before a debate, one of our last prep sessions, where he told me, he was a business owner, and he told me how he forewent his own salary through the entire housing crisis so that he didn't have to lay off a single employee. And I was like, you're telling me this now when that should have been like there should have been a whole ad about that, that was huge. And so that kind of thing is important. So I think number one thing before you come in guns blazing with this cavalier comm strategy, you need to know what your candidate can actually handle and what makes sense to them. Because at the end of the day, if you're just throwing them out there, every media request they get, and they don't seem like they're comfortable in that space and doing that, they're going to come off really awkward, and it's going to make people not want to vote for them or look up their website or donate to them. So you want to make sure that you're really tailoring your strategy to something that fits and is authentic for your candidate.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know we've come to the end of our time for student questions. So I wanted to, once again, from Geopolitics, say thank you so much for your time and for your willingness to come and speak with our students. And and I'll hand it over to you for any last minute remarks that you want to close us out on.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank everybody so much for attending. This was awesome. Once again, my DMs are open. Seriously, ask me a question if you have anything you're thinking of. If you want to chat with me about, what you're thinking of for some of you guys that are graduating this year, happy to chat through all of them. I'm really good at resume critique as well, so please use me. And then on top of that, work on a race. Just please work on a race. I don't care if you have to leave GC. Just go. It'll be fine. You can come back later. Your DNCs, D trips, they'll be here forever. Just go work on a race. This year's an off year, but there's stuff going on in Virginia. Next year is going to be really exciting for midterms. Just work on something. It's going to be fine. And don't feel like you have to go in with a specific plan. I started as research. Now I'm a full comm staffer. I'm actually starting a new job next week that I can't talk about yet, but I'm really excited. Yeah, like you can, it doesn't really matter. No one's gonna look at your resume and be like, oh, well, you only did research, so that's your lane forever. Just try it out. It'll be fun. It'll be really fulfilling. You'll make the best friends of your life. It sounds like summer camp. But it's true. Like, you make a lot of lifelong friends. So it's just a really rewarding experience. And I always recommend that everybody do it.